Welcome back, and thanks for joining us for Two Steps Forward, our daily Bible study. We are all the way up to episode 95 and Exodus 2. We've just started our journey in Exodus, which is such a cool. If you don't know, I don't think I touched on this yesterday, but the idea of Exodus is it's a historical event, but it serves as an incredible metaphor for the life of a believer.
Mm-hmm.
You have a people who start out enslaved, crying out to God. God calls them.
Mm-hmm.
He leads them. He leads them through water that purifies them from their enemies. He leads them through a wilderness they constantly grumble, and they're trying to get to a promised land.
Mm-hmm.
That's the story of God's people. Like, that is the story of every one of God's people, whether you lived back then or you live now. And it's this cool, but the idea is right now, if you have been brought into God's family, if you're doing this Bible study, I'm assuming you are now a child of God, a baptized child of God. That means, and if you're not in heaven yet and studying with us, you are...
People in heaven are studying with us?
I haven't ruled it out. It's possible, but
I think they have better resources up there than this.
Judging by our view count, I think it's only people on Earth, and a living number of those at that. But yes, if you're so you're not to the promised land, but you're through the water. Guess what that means you are?
I'm still in the wilderness.
You're in the wilderness, and that's where God's people are.
I'm still grumbling.
You have God looking out for you. You have God leading you. You have a massive tribe of people who are with you as believers, and yet you still feel threatened. You still feel sometimes isolated and alone. You still feel like it's not as good as it should be, and that's what living in the wilderness and as a believer is.
Mm-hmm.
So. That's kind of the big metaphor that we'll continue to circle back to throughout the book, but make sure to read through your copy of Exodus 2 at home. Here is my personal paraphrase. A married Levite couple became pregnant and gave birth to a son. They hid him for 3 months, but when it became impossible to do so any longer, they made a floating basket to place in the Nile River. The boy's sister watched to make sure that he was going to be okay. Pharaoh's daughter, bathing in the Nile one day, saw the basket and discovered the baby. She felt sorry for him, and the baby's sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, the baby's sister, so...
Miriam.
Yes, the guy who's going to be Moses. He's not named yet, and I'm trying to hold off on it. But it's confusing when I don't
That's
actually
a surprise that this is Moses.
Well, I don't know who's read Exodus before and who hasn't.
Okay, a baby.
This unnamed baby's sister... whose name we don't know yet, she asked Pharaoh's daughter if she'd like her to go get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the child, and Pharaoh's daughter encouraged her to do so. So Moses' mom was then able to nurse the baby boy, Moses, until he was old enough to live with Pharaoh's daughter. He was named Moses because he was drawn up from the water, which is what his name sort of literally means. Arguably also a foreshadowing of what would happen at the Red Sea. One day, when older, Moses encountered an Egyptian beating one of his own people. So this is like a fast forward of about 40 years.
How does he know? So he knows he's a Hebrew.
Yes, he knows he's a Hebrew. He knows his mother must have told him what
happened. And his grandpa was okay with her just taking a Hebrew child because she's the princess.
Because she gets to choose. Yep. If that's what she wants, she's seemingly, again, God providentially sort of creates her as a person of this compassion that wants to take in this child. So yes, he's living in between different kind of worlds here. He's living in the palace.
He knows he's a Hebrew, but he looks and acts and everything like an Egyptian.
Yes, and remember, even by this point, when Joseph's family, when his brothers moved into Egypt, they lived in this region called Goshen, which meant that they intermarried with one another. There probably is some some ethnic difference between the Hebrews and the Egyptians. So
well, yeah.
They would have noticed.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. They probably would have dressed him up with adornments and stuff, don't you think?
Yes, I do think so. But after 400 years of breeding with one, as separate
Oh,
groups,
you're saying they didn't look as dissimilar. Oh, no, you're saying they were totally separate.
I think they looked visibly different. Yes, yeah. Even though they're from the same climate and all that stuff. So probably not as different as what somebody in North America and South America would look today. But point being, I think they could tell. Plus, I think Pharaoh's daughter explained. Anyways, one day Moses is older, about 40 years old. He encounters an Egyptian who's beating, a slave master who's beating Moses' people, the Hebrews, a Hebrew. Moses made sure nobody was watching at the time, and he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. The next day, he found two Hebrews fighting, and he tried to stop them and said, "You guys shouldn't be doing this to one another." And the Hebrews questioned if Moses was going to kill them like he had killed the Egyptian. Moses realized that what he did to the Egyptian was not done in secret. He must have been found out, and people were talking about it. Pharaoh eventually hears that what Moses has done, and he's planning to kill him. So Moses...
Why?
Why would he kill Moses?
So if Moses is a prince and all he did was kill a slave, I'm not saying like that's a nothing.
Why would
but
Pharaoh be so upset with Moses?
yeah, because Pharaoh is clearly doesn't value these people as people himself.
You mean his
because
Egyptians?
he's enslaved them and overworked them and.
No, Moses has killed an Egyptian.
Oh, he killed an Egyptian.
Yeah, there was an Egyptian taskmaster.
Okay.
So the Israelites have become these enslaved people.
He's still a prince, though.
He is. So the idea, the fact that Pharaoh makes the decision that he would kill Moses, I think what he realizes politically is if he allows my grandson, a Hebrew, to get away with this, the Egyptians are going to revolt against me. So it's not at all unseen in antiquity that parents would kill their kids if there might be a threat to the throne or something like that.
In the movie, it was more of like an accidental, but this makes it sound very deliberate. She was premeditated. Maybe he like looked around.
Right. He's clearly ashamed of it.
Yeah.
So to what extent was it deliberate? That's my sense, is maybe he grabs a weapon of some sort, a stone or a stick or whatever, and conks the Egyptian on the head. And, who knows exactly at that point if you're just knocking him out or if you're killing him, but he clearly, or what you're trying to do, but he clearly did kill him. So.
Okay, so I think the most interesting thing is that he is clearly defending the Hebrews.
Yep.
But yet when he's talking to these Hebrews, they're like, who are you? Like, we don't need you to defend us. You're not one of us.
Yep.
Like, they don't accept him either, even though he sees them as his people.
Correct, which it makes Moses the template of an ultimate exile. He's got no... He never really is home anywhere. He's born into a world that doesn't even want him. Remember, Pharaoh had ordered this edict that the baby boys be born. Where is Moses ever really, truly home? The world does not want him. The palace doesn't necessarily want him. His people don't necessarily want him. He flees to the Midians, and
That's his home.
Wanted there.
That becomes his home.
It becomes his home, but my point is he's never actually...
Yeah.
He never has a real native place, and yet, so he's the prototype of what it is to be a believer in this world. We're not in heaven yet, so any place on earth, no matter where we are, no matter how nice it is, it's not really home. That's part of the brilliance and the depth of Exodus. Anyways, again, Pharaoh heard what Moses had done, planned to kill him. Moses fled to Midian and sat down by a well. Midian is a couple hundred miles away, by the way. It's all the way from Egypt. Then you go to the Sinai Peninsula, which is where like the Mount Horeb and when we get to the Ten Commandments are. And then you go over even farther east. And you finally get to Midian.
Did you take a camel?
We're
Camel taxi?
We're not told what amenities he had available on his travels. A Midianite priest named Ruel, also more commonly generally known as Jethro, had 7 daughters who came to draw water from that well. And when some shepherds were essentially harassing the women and giving them a hard time, Moses came to their rescue. The daughters returned home and explained to their father that an Egyptian... Oh,
so he clearly still looked like an Egyptian.
At the very least, he was dressed culturally, like an Egyptian. And they might not have even known who the Israelites were, as a people. But, yes, an Egyptian had rescued them from some shepherds and helped them water their flock. Jethro told the girls to invite him over for dinner. Jethro then gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage, and when they had a son, Moses named him Gershom, referring to the fact that he was an alien in a foreign land. After a long time, the Pharaoh of Egypt died. The Israelites continued to cry out to God in their distress, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God was paying attention to the Israelites, was concerned about them even as they were crying out for these past, several hundred years. And that's where Exodus 2 ends. All right, here's the devotional thoughts for the day. Devotional thought number 1. I'm going to call it miracle, random coincidence, or careful planning. So, it seems like if I say Hail Mary, do you know what that is? Not like the...
Only because I've heard it so many
from a
times in the
sports term.
past. Right.
Yeah,
Years.
so a Hail Mary football pass is like, okay, we don't even have a play drawn up for this. This is our last chance to score. We're going to have the quarterback drop back, throw it as far as he can, hopefully to the end zone, and, score a touchdown.
Normally, I don't appreciate sports euphemisms. But
I know you do not, and so I'm glad that you're able to resonate with that one. But the point is, it's like the last
ditch. It's a last ditch effort.
It's become a euphemism just in life in general for like, okay, this is the last possible thing that could work. We don't think it's going to work, but so they place Moses, who has been ordered by the Hebrew midwives to be, the baby boys to be killed. They place him in a wicker basket that they make essentially, floatable, and put it in the Nile River. And they're hoping somebody's going to find him, maybe have some mercy on him.
Do you think God told them to do this?
So here's the thing. Here's my question in all of this.
Yes.
Is, does Moses' sister know the princess's routine? Is this just, does she know, like, this is the place where she bathes and this is the time of the week when she bathes, and like that kind of thing? Does she know the princess at all? Is she a servant to the princess? Is this a strategy? Is this God's divine providence, and it's a random coincidence, but God's providence? Is it just a miracle? Or, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't matter? Because I think what we understand as believers, and maybe there's a good reason why God doesn't tell us here, because our lives as Christians are a combination of all those different things.
Yeah.
Now, we often, when we pray and we want a solution, we're asking for a miracle. But how many times hasn't God saved us, or hasn't He provided for us simply by divine providence that we never even noticed?
I'm pretty sure He saved me from at least 200 car accidents.
So, exactly. So maybe that is the thing. He's commanded His angels to guard you, and if we saw that it happened in real time and we were aware of it, we would label it a miracle. But instead, we kind of categorize it as God's divine providence, which is still sensational that He's constantly working around the globe to, send His angels to do such things. And around the clock.
He works around a lot of things.
But, so is it His divine providence? Is it miracle? Or, again, is it if He works through the cunningness and cleverness of Moses' sister Miriam, does that make it any less impressive? God gave, it reminds me of in James 1, he says, every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of the heavenly lights. So if something good happens, it's God's hand, whether it's providential, whether it's miraculous, or whether it's God working through other believers. It's still God, so God still gets the glory in all of it. I think our lives are a combination of those different factors.
Yeah.
Devotional thought number 2. Moses is not ready to lead. So, which is interesting because he's been trained to lead. Nobody on planet Earth had been groomed to lead more, had better tutors, better education. He had a palace education. He's 40 years old. He's specifically been trained for leadership this entire time.
Why doesn't he have a wife?
Yeah, that's
kind of a weirdo.
A bit curious. I haven't heard any specific theories on it, but rather than venture a guess, just say he doesn't. It's probably a little bit of a hard sell too, from a standpoint of, so we're watching The Crown right now on Netflix and talking through even how concerned they are about who children marry.
Oh, yeah.
As far as that kind of thing. Now, here you take a Hebrew son of a princess. And
he's not really anything.
Right.
He's not really a prince.
What power does he have? But could you see somebody trying to leverage that to gain access to the throne? Like, my point is, I think it could create some problems and political intrigue and stuff like that. So, I mean, maybe they wanted to steer clear of even him having kids or anything like that sort of thing. Anyways, he is rightly upset by the social injustice that he sees going on in his society. The Egyptians are oppressing the Hebrews. Well, because he's a Hebrew, he looks at that as my particular people, which, again, is natural, and God uses things like that as well. But how does Moses respond to that? He sees a Hebrew getting beaten by a taskmaster, one day loses it, because he's probably seen this happen on a number of occasions, loses it, goes out, and how does he respond to the unjust violence that he sees. He responds to violence with violence. He responds to injustice by taking the man's life. He responds with injustice. And then he tries to cover up his actions, so he clearly proves that he knows he's in the wrong. He's not doing anything illegal here. But he's discovered and his reputation is damaged. However, his lack of self-control, his impulsivity, his violence from the anger, the deceit to cover all of it up, all of that indicates to me that, even if Moses was in power at this time, would Egypt actually be a better place? Because he's functioning just like all the bad Egyptians.
Yeah.
He's just unjustly violent too. Would the world actually be a better place if Moses was in power? And God essentially is bringing his judgment here and saying, no, Moses is not qualified for leadership until I humble him. And again, what's so fascinating to me then is Moses has been trained for leadership for 40 years. And God says, no, because as smart as you are, as well educated as you are, you're so proud. And how do we know he's proud? Well, he thinks it's okay for him to take a life. He thinks he's qualified and justified in taking another human life, which must mean you think you're better than them. And so that is not the type of leader that hurts their people, that God's people need. And so God says, nope, I'm going to spend the next 40 years humbling you. Now, he doesn't tell Moses this, but this is what he does. It isn't until Moses is going to be 80 years old, not leading people, but leading sheep for the past 40 years in a far-off land, before he's humble enough that God says, okay, now I can use you. So a proud, highly qualified individual, not qualified to lead God's people. A humble shepherd who is old and in the world's eyes even somewhat perceived as useless. Now God says, yes, now I can use you to lead my people. So at this point, Moses not ready to lead. Number 3, Moses moves from outsider to outsider to yet another outsider, and that teaches us that our home is not in this world. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but he's the perfect embodiment of living as an exile. He's born with a mandate to be killed. He's raised in Pharaoh's palace, but he doesn't have a close relationship either necessarily with the Pharaoh, who eventually wants to kill him, or his family, like his biological family. He kills a guy in frustration and in anger, which probably tells you he's burnt out and frustrated and angry by life. But that forces him, it alienates him even more. He's going to have to flee to Midian, which is a couple 100 miles away.
That's just a tractor driving down a road.
Of course, there's a tractor.
There's also insane
Also still
birds.
speeding. It's not even a car and he's still speeding.
Why are there so many loud birds?
We're in the rainforest. This is...
Yeah, it's like Rainforest Cafe in here.
Yes. It's prehistoric. Giant birds of some sort. Anyways, he also eventually returns to leads God's people in Egypt to the Promised Land, and he never actually gets into the Promised Land.
Yeah.
And so it's this recurring theme that Moses is, again, the prototype that in this world we never get home. Doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter your status, whether you are the prince of Egypt or whether you are a shepherd in a foreign land in Midian. Whether you are leading a ton of people or whether you are a baby ready to die in a wicker basket, you're never actually home this side of heaven.
The first crush I ever had was the cartoon Moses from The Prince of Egypt.
That's...
I really liked his Egyptian guyliner.
Yeah. He was pretty hunky. I do remember that. I feel like they...
But,
days.
It was the queen who saved him in the movie, though. And then he grew up, his brother was the pharaoh. And when he comes back to save the people, that's his brother.
I only saw it once a long time ago. I do remember they took some creative license, but it was entertaining. Anyways, let's close the prayer.
Do you know who this pharaoh is?
I'm going to get to that in the next couple of days, so yeah, we'll share. Heavenly Father, thank you again for blessing our study of Exodus 2. The lesson we learned from Moses, one of humility, not from his humility here. Here he's proud. Here he thinks he can hurt anybody he wants. Here he thinks he is has the right to judge the world. And he needs to be humbled for many, many years. And a lot of us experience that right now too, Lord. Help us to be as humble as you want us to be, as Christ-like as you can make us. But also help us understand that in this lifetime, we are strangers in this world and heaven is our home. We are in exile, we are in the wilderness, but we have so much opportunity to worship and glorify you. And Moses learned that lesson, and we need you to continue to teach it to us. May we do so and be your ambassadors in the world to the glory of your name. Amen. Thanks again for studying with us. We'll see you tomorrow for Exodus 3.